Everybody, welcome to the Overview and Scrutiny Committee of Cheltenham Borough Council. My name is Councillor John Payne. I'm the chair of the committee. The meeting is being streamed live to the Cheltenham Borough Council YouTube channel. If you make a representation to the meeting, you will be deemed to have consented to be filmed and to the possible use of those images and sound recordings for broadcasting and or training purposes. Please note, a fire alarm test is not expected, so if the alarm does sound, please make your way to the nearest fire exit following me. Right, item 1 on the agenda, apologies. Apologies have been received from Councillor Emma Nelson. Councillor Matt Babbage is attendance as substitute. Apologies have been received from Councillor Graham Beale, and Councillor Dr David Willingham is in attendance as substitute. Are there any more apologies? Councillor Fifield has also sent his apologies. It's on my script, I didn't read it. Okay, that's fine. Declarations of interest. Are there any declarations of interest on the items? Dr Willingham.
Thank you, Chair. Just to say that in relation to item number 7, I'm chair of the licensing committee, so I think, and I've obviously got an interest in it from that point of view, so it's not prejudicial, but I think it's worth putting that on record. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Okay, the minutes of the last meeting, the minutes of the 5th of June meeting have been circulated with the agenda. I am not aware of any amendments.
Please, could it be noted that the questions that I asked to Cheltenham Airport, that they said they would come back after the meeting and answer. I sent the questions in advance, but they hadn't done them. And they then said, we will come back after and answer those questions. Those questions haven't been answered.
Thank you very much, Julian. We'll follow that up. I move then... Oh, sorry.
Sorry, Chair. Can I note that I was also, quote, in attendance as well to present the item at 7 in the minutes, so just so that I'm recorded as being here for that meeting.
Thank you very much. We'll note that. No more. I move that the members approve the minutes held on the 5th of June. A show of hands. Okay, thank you very much. Item 4 on the agenda, public and members' questions, calls for actions and petitions. There are no public or members' questions, calls for actions or petitions have been received. Item 5, a cabinet briefing. Normally this would come from Councillor Hay, but she's at the LGA conference and Councillor Jeffries is substituting. The objective of this section is an update from Cabinet on key issues for Cabinet members which may be of interest to the Overview and Scrutiny Committee and may inform the work plan. Over to you, Councillor Jeffries.
Thank you, Chair. With such a build-up, I feel quite sad that I've got to disappoint the committee as I've nothing to bring from the Cabinet at this time. But thank you for the wonderful introduction.
Thank you, Councillor. Does any member have any questions for Councillor Jeffries? No. Okay, thank you. Matters, item 6 on the agenda, matters referred to the committee. I'm not aware of any matters having been referred. Nope. And we move on to the business of the meeting. Item 7, Race Week. And the objective here is looking back on the 2023 festival. What were the successes and the lessons learnt? And I'd like to invite Louis Krog, Head of Public Protection, and Inspector Mike Yates from Gloucestershire Police.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Also say it's Mike's rest day today, so we're very thankful for his presence today on his rest day. So just by way of, I guess, reminder and context, members will know when we came in January and February to this committee to talk about the planning for the 2023 event, that came against the backdrop of quite significant antisocial behaviour and public urination, in particular in the 2022 event. And so a lot of work was put in place by the council, by the police, and of course by the racecourse, the Love the Turf campaign, to address these specifically, and a lot of additional measures that would normally not have been in place were put in place. And the purpose of, I guess, this meeting tonight is to see whether those have worked. So as part of the response and in terms of dealing with the levels of antisocial behaviour and public urination we saw in 2022, the Jockey Club reduced its capacity, its daily capacity up at the racecourse, restricting it to 68,500 people a day. That's a reduction of about 5,000 people, particularly on Gold Cup Day. So quite a significant number, particularly in ticket sales and income for the Jockey Club. This year we had the additional problem of rail strikes. So we had train strikes on the Thursday, which is the busiest day of the race week. Of course, that then has a knock-on effect on Friday. And then we had further train strikes on the Saturday when the sort of residual racegoers left. The racecourse estimates with British Transport Police that about 66,000 people arrived by train. So it had quite a big impact in terms of the planning and being able to get people to do the racecourse on the train strike days and getting them out again. And you will remember we talked about National Express coaches being lined up to car people in and then to take them home again. And it's also just worth noting that the Deputy Chief Constable this year proactively stood up a strategic coordinating group just in advance of anything happening. And that was the first time we did that as well for a race week. So in terms of the planning, I guess the context, like I say, we did a lot of issues in 2022. And just to summarise very briefly, the additional measures was the Love Your Turf campaign, which saw marshals, Jockey Club marshals in the vicinity up and down Evesham Road, New Barn Lane, Swindon Village, just encouraging good behaviour, handing out I think suites for people, and there was additional toilets all over the place. That was supplemented by police officers and PCSOs who were stationed at key locations along particularly Evesham Road as people were leaving the racecourse and walking up to the racecourse. And then CBC officers were supporting that, and then we rolled out additional toilets throughout the town centre because the toilets along Evesham Road in the vicinity of the racecourse were looked after by the Jockey Club. So they took ownership of that. We took ownership of the facilities in the town. So just in terms of, I guess, what we would class success, it's difficult to measure success, but I think a good indicator is the number of complaints that we get. At Appendix 1 of the report, members will just have a breakdown of the complaints that we sort of dealt with last year. Compare that to what we had this year. I think we generally felt that the War and We campaign, and that was supported by the Love Your Turf campaign and the police deployment along particularly Evesham Road, we saw a significant drop in the number of complaints directly received to this council. So we only complaints made to Cheltenham Borough Council in terms of particularly antisocial behaviour and public urination was around 4. That was linked to town centre. So I should contextualise that in the nighttime economy, We saw public urination, more generally speaking, but those weren't complaints as such. I think we saw it. And I'll talk about particular sort of hotspots that we'll need to address in the following year. Saw a big spike in the number of illegal street trading. So everybody's obviously trying to earn a buck that week and chancing their luck. So we'll need to address that, particularly along the Eastern Road. People opening up the sort of the front drives to sell drinks and alcohol and cakes and sweets and stuff. So not a major issue, but it's probably just a bit of education and just look at the process. So in terms of, I guess, lessons learned and improvements we need to make for March 2024, as I said, although there was a significant rollout of additional toilets around town, that to an extent displaced the issue along alleyways on the high street, so people were just finding an alleyway, even though there were toilets available. Post Office Lane was particularly badly affected, and I spoke to the owner of the bank on the corner, and he was particularly frustrated, and we were able to help him with hydrophobic paint, et cetera, but I think that Post Office Lane needs looking at, and the alley of Ormond Place, where there's a car park at the back for the businesses there, that was also particularly badly affected. Yeah, we had toilets around, but I think some of it was displaced, and some people, we're never going to get rid of public urination in race week. Some people just choose not to use the toilets that we make available. I think certainly feedback from the business improvement districts, I think we continue to have difficulty with the location of the pickup on the high street for people going up to the racecourse, particularly in the morning. Massive queues all the way along the high street. You know, it's obstructing people that want to use that part of the high street, and people get. I think we've had some complaints about antisocial behaviour and aggressive behaviour by racegoers when they were challenged about obstructing the highway and can we just get round at police and litter dropping, etc. So that's something we need to deal with County Council about, just to see if we can find a better location for the thousands of people that are trying to get on buses in the morning. And it also closes the Pitfall taxi rank, which upsets the taxi drivers at a time when they should be, you know, at a peak when they should be, you know, getting business from that location. So that's something that we need to address. Just find my page. Yeah. So, and Mr. Chair, you will recognise number 3. Those are the comments that you submitted at the request around parking issues and traffic management around the racecourse that we need to pick up directly with County Council and the racecourse itself. So those have been really helpful. Thank you very much. Just sort of 2 more. I think the water repellent or the urinal repellent paint was useful, and we were able to help individual businesses and residents who took up the offer of having this paint. But I think if we want to see the full effect of it, we need to roll it out properly. You know, I think Soho was mentioned as an example, but that was commercially applied over a large area. It's not a paintbrush and a paint. So I think if if this authority wants to roll that out again, I think that decision needs to be made early on, and the money needs to be identified early on to allow officers to, to essentially do a proper job and see the maximum effect of that. And just one last thing that I forgot when I wrote the paper, but on-street parking enforcement. Or the distinct lack of on-street parking enforcement was a huge issue in race week. Cars were just parking on taxi ranks, blocking taxi ranks, leaving cars parking on pavements and walkways and just leaving cars, making it difficult for pedestrians. And there was, I certainly didn't see any on-street parking enforcement or parking wardens that week, and it was desperately needed. So I think, generally speaking, we felt that this year's event went much better. There were still issues clearly around traffic management and public urination, etc. But I think on the whole, it was much better resolved, far fewer complaints. So yeah, thank you.
Thank you, Louis. Inspector Yates, would you like to comment from the police perspective?
Evening all. That was very comprehensive from Louis. So I'll add a bit of context from a policing perspective, and then I'm happy to take sort of questions on any specific issues or concerns that people have. From a policing perspective, I think it goes without saying this is by far the biggest and most complex event from a resourcing and logistical point of view by some way that the constabulary deal with on an annual basis. The policing operation covers everything from public order and public safety to aerial space to road traffic management and obviously community impact. So my role in the operation is exclusively, or was exclusively this past year, around community impact. Pretty much, whilst we've got obviously responsibility and we've got concern around the entire Cheltenham footprint, because Race Week has an impact on the whole of the town, the focus was largely around the Evesham Road and surrounding roads and that egress point from the racecourse footprint into the town centre. We obviously put an extreme amount of resources into the footprint of the racecourse to deal with that public order, public safety element. So this year, working with colleagues, working with the racecourse, I think we increased the numbers that we had. I think we recognised going forwards a couple of years, our numbers have become thinner and thinner in that part of the operation, really for practical reasons, for the numbers available for that bit of the operation. So we went out to the rest of the constabulary, to other neighbourhood policing teams to increase the numbers there. I was on the ground every single night of the operation. I think it's fair to say the atmosphere was very decent on pretty much all the evenings. I think the Thursday and the Friday, as sort of expected, the numbers increased and we did see some more challenges. The biggest change we saw on that element of the policing operation this year, as opposed to previous years, was the traffic management plan. So we had, for the first time, bollards and a partial road closure down the Evesham Road. I think we took some learning, certainly on the first couple of nights, in terms of the implementation of that, the length of time that partial road closure was in place for. The sort of decision-making around that is not something that I was involved in, albeit the intelligence and information that we were gathering on the ground fed into that decision-making. But obviously there was a consideration there for how long that is left on for, because I think the authority there allowed it to be in place for significantly longer, but obviously the desire is to get it off as soon as possible to reduce the knock-on impact on members of the public who just want to use the vehicle access on the road. It worked very well, I think, certainly on the quieter of the days. What we did see is on the busier days, particularly towards the end of the week, some of the challenges that we encountered in previous years, just up at the roundabout with the immediate egress from the course, actually it just delayed them to further down the road. So where you've got quite a tidy system where you funnel people onto half of the road, and then you've got traffic able to use the other half, and people can spill out onto the road, and you spread that out. Unfortunately, when they then get to the end of the closure, they just spill out, and they're now covering the whole road. And if you have extreme crowds, which we do get towards the end of the week, actually that then becomes very congested. It becomes a bit of a public safety issue because we have vehicles trying to go against oncoming traffic. I suppose the fortunate thing is it's so congested and the traffic is so slow anyway, from a public safety point of view. It's not urgent. It doesn't require immediate intervention. It just then creates a logistical headache in how we manage that and use the resources we've got present to try and filter and push that back into where we need it to be and start to ease that traffic management. It's notwithstanding the fact that traffic management isn't part of the operation that my team and resources should be dealing with, but I think it's accepted that if we're there and that issue is present, we are going to deal with it because we need to. In terms of the the antisocial behaviour element, which is the other big part of the operation that we are aiming to deal with and reduce and be preventative, I think our objectives going out into it were very much to be visible, present from the start when we needed to be, engaging with people in a positive manner, trying to set the tone, but also setting a line in the sand around acceptable behaviour and intervening. What I didn't want was the presence of community support officers and activities have taken place which is clearly unacceptable, and no sort of intervention or challenge. It is a challenging situation because if you're looking at 60,000 odd people, some of whom are extremely intoxicated and potentially behaving poorly, and you have a handful of community support officers spread along a large distance, the reality is if you're going 600 yards, they can't see one another. They have very little support. So the police officers are vital sort of in supporting those officers who have limited powers and obviously less experience in dealing with confrontational situations. What we did find, though, was the positive engagement was very useful. We did lots of messaging in advance of race week, and I think we saw far fewer issues than we did in previous years. I think that the increase in the sort of toilets that were available in that area of town was very useful, notwithstanding the fact that some people will just behave in that way regardless because they're so heavily intoxicated. I did witness people urinating on the side of the urinals because they just were that intoxicated. They didn't even know what it was, and they couldn't be bothered. So as unpleasant as it is, if you're looking forward-facing at preventative solutions, for example, things that people are going to think about and think, I won't do it because, actually, you can't necessarily cater for all circumstances because some people just will behave that way regardless. And that is when we then need to sort of think about how we manage that and deal with it. So we did issue retrospective penalty notices to individuals. We worked with our colleagues from sort of the council enforcement around that because our ability to issue penalty notices for disorder is not there legislatively anymore. That's been withdrawn and we deal with it a different way. However, we have to think about the proportionality of arresting people and just the practicality in those circumstances for low-level public order offences. So that was very useful working with colleagues from the council to issue tickets. That's probably all I've got to say in the first instance, but yeah, more than happy to take queries from people.
Thank you very much. I'll open it up to questions, but I'm going to use my prerogative as chair to get the first one in. I was very pleased to see the number of wardens, marshals around. Could you sort of enlighten us as to the relationship between the marshals and the police when it comes to traffic management? And I'm thinking particularly of Tatchley Roundabout, where there were 3 marshals who clearly hadn't a clue about traffic management. In fact, all 3 of them stood on Bouncers Lane and they ignored the other junctions completely. If there had been an accident, where would the liability lie?
So, as a caveat, the traffic management isn't part of my role in the operation. We do have a bronze police lead for traffic management from our roads policing department. However, my understanding is the traffic management physically in terms of the actual marshalling of vehicles is the responsibility of the marshals and the race course on the day. So it isn't something that the police deal with. However, as another caveat, where there's public safety issues, if we witness it, the likelihood is we will intervene, and that's some of the struggles we've had over previous years when we've had really finite resources, therefore community impact and antisocial behaviour, because the level of marshalling was insufficient or the plan was not up to scratch. We found ourselves drawn into that, which has then detracted from our capability and capacity to do the other elements of the operation. So the short answer is it's with the marshals. That's their responsibility.
I think Councillor Took has a question.
So, first of all, thank you to everyone involved, because actually I do think it ran better this year, so thank you. My question is for Inspector Yates specifically, and again as a preamble, I'd say thank you for doing what you do. We can all sleep at night and feel secure because you do what you do, so thank you. There is a but coming though. That but, I'll start off by quoting the Peel Report 21-22 to you. Her Majesty's Inspector said of your police force, the force's crime identification and safeguarding processes do not ensure that all reported crimes are recorded, and vulnerable or repeat victims are not always identified. This means that some victims don't get the services or protection they need. The name of this victim needs to stay anonymous, but victim X wrote to me, who was a vulnerable person, because he was repeatedly punched at the racecourse. He he reported that assault as an assault to the police. You didn't record it as assault, you recorded it as damage to property. Now, we must protect the victim X, as I say, a vulnerable person. This shouldn't have happened. I wrote to the police inspector, sorry, I've got his name, the Commissioner Nelson, about the topic. My question to you, given the Peel report and given the feedback that I've had, is when you say how the race week went and how policing went, can we believe what you say in terms of the crimes and the reported crimes, let alone the unreported crimes, which undoubtedly happened?
Yeah, no, I completely appreciate the point that you raised. Yeah, really appreciate the point that you raised. In regards to the last Peel report, there's obviously several layers of complexity around crime recording, and I would hope that by and large, some of the context of that report was around some of the process in place in the constabulary around calls coming into call centres, information not being picked out where specific individual crimes are noted but not necessarily recorded in the right channels, or I think what they're talking about is data integrity. So that's something the constabulary have worked really hard over the last few years since the report to improve those processes so that we get better at that and ensure that actually every single individual crime or victim, according to the Home Office counting rules, is recorded as it should be. Individual cases where somebody has made a report or a specific event has taken place and they speak to a police officer and either through misunderstanding or otherwise that's not recorded correctly, that's something entirely different, and that obviously needs to be addressed as a performance issue or potentially a disciplinary issue or potentially just a misunderstanding where we take learning from the fact that actually, we didn't do what we should have done on that occasion because there was some sort of mitigation or there was some sort of contextual issue. It may be just an operational challenge whereby there was so much going on, some information has been missed. I don't know the individual circumstances, but I fully take the point, and I'd be more than happy to pick it up and investigate further if it's not already been done so. But yeah, contextually speaking, just around the challenges of the operation, particularly inside the footprint of the race course, if we're talking about some of the stands, sometimes it is really, really challenging in terms of just the volume of what's taking place and officers having to deal with that. That doesn't excuse, obviously, if officers have been called upon for help and, an individual victim has not been given that. So, no, I certainly apologise in those circumstances if that's what's taking place.
Councillor Harvey.
Got it. Just before I go on to my piece, Julian, without details, was the person X the person that was beaten up at the roundabout, at the racecourse?
I prefer not to say.
No, fine. It's just that's been well reported in the local media, so it's disappointing if it is related. I'm not suggesting it is, that it wasn't picked up at the time. Inspector Yates, thank you so much for coming on your day off. I'm a former shift worker myself, and having worked operationally with 5 constabularies in this country, it was me that was very keen on having somebody at least from bronze level who could answer questions. We've certainly had a very good chat from yourself already, so thank you. I didn't watch the Channel 5 programme about Gloucestershire policing and the races this year because I wanted my questions to be fresh, but I will have another look at it when I get home. And if you could pass on my best wishes to Inspector Paul Cruz, because he did my daughter's work experience with the force. And it was nice to see him with his...
You'll see a lot more of him if you watch the
yeah, no, I know.
programme.
But it goes to your point. It goes to your point about engaging with people. And he is such a nice chap with it that the stuff I saw with him being involved was really good. So that actually counts for quite a lot, because if people go in with an aggressive nature to somebody that's pissed and don't know what they're doing, then they will respond accordingly, whereas he and his colleague didn't. So that was really good. I'm interested in the Local Resilience Forum chair, the relatively new Deputy Chief Constable. And I'm just wondering if the Strategic Coordinating Group was stood up for the first time because Mr. West has joined the force. Is that, or was there something else another reason that you're aware of that the SCG was stood up for this time? Because
It was purely learning and experience that came from DCC West, from previous forces, where actually we just need to be ready to act, whereas in previous years nothing was proactively stood up, so we had to then start afresh if there was an emergency.
Brilliant.
This was him bringing that experience to the county and saying this is how it should be done.
well, if we could record his thanks for bringing that experience into his relatively new role. I know it was August, September last year. But it's interesting that this is the first time the strategic coordinating group have been stood up for a festival that's been running for over 100 years. So that's a really good lesson learned. But
Yes, and I think just saying to that, this is also the first year where the safety advisory group for the racecourse and the safety advisory group for the rest of the footprint of the town also came together. Partly because we've raised concerns with that before, but so there is a much more joint-up approach, and a lot of it is distributable to DCC West.
brilliant. I was interested to hear what you said about whole-of-town policing, because when we had our pre-briefs in February and January of this year, it just related to marshalling at the racecourse. You are spot on, Inspector Yates, in saying that this is a bigger issue than just there, because when they leave the racecourse, where do they come? They come into town. They go to the racecourse. They go to the railway station. Do you know how many neighbouring forces and neighbouring officers came to assist you this year? And is that likely to happen next year?
So with neighbouring forces, very limited. In terms of traffic management, there may be some motorcyclists that come from other forces, but it's not something we use mutual aid for. It's resourced entirely from Gloucestershire Constabulary. British Transport Police do assist with, obviously, the footprint of the train station, and obviously commuters who are travelling in via train. But no, beyond that, we don't use mutual aid for the operation.
Okay, thank you. And just a final point. It's interesting, the comments about the parking enforcement, or lack of it, and also the Pittville Street taxi rank, both in the responsibility of the County Council. And the comment I'd make, actually, because the Chief Exec of the Cheltenham Festivals is here, civil enforcement during the festivals is remarkably, is noticeably absent, and people park everywhere. So it's not a criticism of you, Ali. It's more to do with for the policing to pick up. Well, not policing, sorry, the county. You know, parking enforcement in the town is done by the county council, but when there's a big event on and lots of cars, they don't seem to be around. So I think we're being shortchanged by them. Thank you, Chair.
Councillor Wayne, if you'll just allow Darren just to say a quick word.
Thank you, Chair. It was just to follow up on Councillor Harvey's point about the SCG. I sit on that for Cheltenham Borough Council, and I have to say that I think DCC West has brought a huge amount of experience to that and has really greatly improved the cooperation, collaboration, how that's structured for the festivals, really. And it's been really impressive working with him and learning a lot from him as well. So I think we should be really reassured that we've got that level of experience overseeing Gloucestershire's emergency planning. It's been really, really great to work with him, actually. And I think some of the learning we've seen already, with an immediate impact we've had, is the examples that Lewis highlighted. So that should give us a lot of confidence moving forward. Thank you, Chair.
Councillor Willingham.
Thank you, Chair. Can I just check, this is just questions at the moment, and then we will come back to anything else? Okay, brilliant. So I have a couple of questions. First one, British Transport Police, you obviously work with them. I represent, as a councillor, the area around the station, and one of the things that we have is people turning up quite early in the morning, already inebriated and falling off the trains. And I have tried quite hard to lobby the Transport Police and the train operating companies to run dry trains, which they have the power to do. They do it for football. They do it in the north, in some trains on a Friday evenings in various parts of the country. So effectively, can we lobby to have the trains coming into Cheltenham early morning as dry, so that people who are already a nuisance because they are so drunk before they have got past Worcester or Bristol or Swindon and various other places that actually have British Transport Police basis can be detrained and detained at that place. They don't even get near Cheltenham to cause your colleagues the issues that they experience around the station. So that's the first one. The second one is a question about the County Council obviously aren't here to answer for themselves, which is a shame. Did we try and get them here? That might be one for... the third question on the county is, they do not have vehicle removal powers. I have asked them about this, and there are some people, including a Bentley driver who parked in the taxi rank outside the Ivy, who probably think that a 40 quid parking fine it's not a deterrent. And irrespective of the absence of parking enforcement, do Gloucestershire Police have vehicle removal powers for things like that? Because the county have basically said, we rely on the police to deal with this type of thing. And clearly a 40 quid parking fee for someone in a Bentley who's that way inclined isn't a deterrent. Whereas picking the vehicle up and taking it to wherever the car pound is, so that when they've come out from their meal, their car ain't there and they've got to get a taxi there, would be somewhat more of a deterrent. And the final one for the committee, which I don't really want to go into in detail here, is given the size of the event, do we at some point want to look at the things that we should look at in terms of Martin's Law and what we may need to ask the County Council to deliver for that, and the sort of new burdens money that we would need to ask for from government to make that happen. And I'm talking around that, so if people don't understand that, there's a good reason for it, and I don't want to go into detail. So those are the questions. Thank you.
Not sure where to start, David. So, working backwards then, parking enforcement and removals, probably no in the circumstances you're alluding to. So we would remove vehicles if they were causing an obstruction to the highway. We would remove them in sort of proactive vehicle stops scenarios where there were no insurance, or the vehicle were potentially going to be driven unlicensed, uninsured, etc. If it were purely a parking enforcement issue, then no, unless it's blocking access or egress or causing obstruction of the highway, we wouldn't seize it. In terms of the British Transport Police, I think it's a fair point that we could probably have better liaison. We do work closely with them. I went down sort of personally to visit the train station, speak to the officers there, make sure we had that sort of coordinated working. I always have sort of contact in advance of the operation, particularly from a community impact perspective, with Project Servitor, who use behavioural detection officers, and they deploy them to the train stations, but will, if we ask and work sort of collaboratively with them, come outside the footprint and that assists us, one, with sort of the public safety aspect, but two, just detection of potential criminal offenders, because we do get people who will come in to prey on the additional vulnerability that will be in the town, whether it's through intoxication or otherwise. So that side of things, we have quite good collaboration. In terms of their area of responsibility and how proactively they deal with that, accepting that they only own it for quite a limited amount of time and then it becomes our area of responsibility, it's probably quite a good point that you raise, that maybe we need to have more liaison around that side of things, to ensure that we're utilising all the tools in the toolkit to, as you say, be preemptive and proactive and look at, can we stop people if they are going to be a nuisance before they even make it here. So I will pick that up and take it away for something in advance of next year to sort of add to our pre-event discussions with the British Transport Police. Martin's Law, perhaps we won't pick up in too much detail, and I can't remember if there was there another question?
It was effectively, it's probably more for the officers, our council officers, is effectively why aren't given their involvement in a lot of this, there's no one here from GCC as far as I'm aware to answer that, which is a bit disappointing. Were they asked, I guess, is the question.
No, because I wasn't asked to ask, but we can have them back in the future. if that's what the committee wants, because there's probably a lot of issues to talk about around traffic management, as Mike said, and parking enforcement. And actually, I would have thought they're missing a trick not having parking enforcement in a race, because they could probably fund the county council for a whole year just parking tickets, and those 4 days. So I'm not really sure the logic behind it, but yeah, I mean, we can get somebody here if that's what the committee wants.
Councillor Babbage, if it's a quick one, because we're running out of time.
There's a few, but I will make them quick, if that's okay. I just wanted to ask, around the stewards, I mean, that seemed to me like the main reason for the improvement in the number of complaints, anecdotally, but I just wanted to understand, what, sort of in terms of the stewards and the number of people around on the streets, how many were from the race course, how many were from the police, how many were from the council, just to kind of get a feel for that, because there did seem to be a noticeable increase in presence of people in high-vis jackets. The other one around the Evesham Road being closed, I thought made a real difference to getting people away from the racecourse quickly and sort of dispersing the crowds to a point. If anything, I would have said it needed to start a bit earlier, because there were still people walking in the road when there were cars coming down, sort of like immediately after the last race, sort of, within, I think the roads were only then closed, I don't know, 15, 20 minutes later. But there was just that one point where it could have been just brought forward, if anything. Around littering, there seem to be more bins around, but not necessarily sort of recycling. I know a lot of the litter is newspapers and things like that. I just wondered if there's something more we can do on that side of it. And then the last one was just around the hydrophobic paint. I mean, what was the cost of that? And how do we actually measure whether that particular measure was effective or not? I mean, like, were there signs put up or something like that to warn people? Because I'm sort of struggling to see how that actually had an impact. So yeah, those are my questions. Sorry, apologies, Chair.
Yeah, so in terms of resourcing, I think I recall there were about sort of 50 stewards, racecourse, Love Your Turf stewards dotted around, and those were made of students, university students and volunteers from, I think, the Rotary Club and various other organisations. So I think there were around 50 along Eaton Road, Newbarn Lane, into Swindon Village and in the vicinity. In terms of CBC officers, depending on the time of day, there were probably about sort of 15, 20 officers mulling around. Those would be licensing officers, environmental health officers, noise officers, neighbourhood team, environment crime, ASB officers. So just depending on the time of day, is our deployment, and I'll leave Mike to just talk about the police numbers.
Yeah, from a policing perspective for that sort of community impact part of the operation, I couldn't give exact numbers because it fluctuated across the days, but essentially I had my entire neighbourhood team spread across 2 shifts, plus all of Tewkesbury neighbourhood team. I think going forwards, I'd only like to expand that by requesting additional assistance from other neighbourhood teams around the Constabulary, because we use a lot of officers from elsewhere in the Constabulary for the footprint of the racecourse, for that public order, public safety element, but obviously the community impact is equally as important, and certainly for the local community, even more so probably. So I would like to increase that further. The only sort of caveat to consider is that the demand on the Constabulary of such a big event, we do have to be mindful of the fact that obviously everywhere else needs policing at the same time, but certainly I'd like to increase it more. But just as a ballpark figure, probably talking mid-20s, I would say, at any given time of officers, and that really is sort of quite an achievement, really, to get those numbers, because we're not working with huge numbers in the first instance. In regards to the road closure, I sort of completely agree. It was really effective, certainly when it was working well. It's a balancing act. We did get some complaints from members of the community who were annoyed that it was on, they couldn't get vehicles out, or they wanted to go somewhere. But I think it was worth doing. We've got a few learning points around taking it off, around where it ends, and dealing with that sort of people bursting out the end. But I think by and large it's better to have it than not have it.
Sorry, Darren.
As usual, time is our enemy here. Darren would just like to have a quick word before we...
Yeah, thank you, Joe. Just in terms of Councillor Babbage's point about I think we refer to as the war on we. I think the cost, was about under £3,000. I think from memory we had external funding for that from the OPCC's office.
So yeah, there was part funding from that, and the CBC funded as well. So it was around just slightly under about £3,000 for that. And I know Darren's going to talk about some of the success measures, but I think because of the first year we were slightly new to this. I think one of the sort of success measures was the number of people who expressed an interest in businesses and residents who wanted that paint. And as I think the paper says, about 25, 30 different individuals and businesses took up the offer and took paint away with them. So I think that's a measure of success for us in terms of the appetite for it.
And just to add, in terms of the profile it raised, this is just some of the media outlets that the War on We was featured in. Obviously Gloss Live, Lad Bible, The Times, The Mirror, Daily Mail, The Racing Post, TalkSport, ITV, BBC, Wales Online, Talk TV, and I think even saw something in Australia, I think on social media. So I think for us, the campaign itself, nationally, the issue of public urination was covered nationally. And I don't think Cheltenham Borough Council has necessarily had a campaign that's achieved that level of national awareness since I've been here, which is almost 5 years. So I think for me, that to get that level of public awareness against some of those media outlets, like things like TalkSport and so on, that was hitting potential racegoers. So for us, really to get a level of national coverage for relatively spending, £3,000, I think that's good value and good profile raising at that national level. So hopefully that answers the question, Councillor Babbage. We're happy to pick up offline if you need to.
As usual, questions about the racecourse always take up a lot of time, which I think shows the importance of the festival meeting. And I also think it reflects on the hard work done by Louis and his team and Inspector Yates. So we thank you for coming along, giving us the latest update, and we look forward to 2024. Thank you very much. Moving on, item 8, Cheltenham's new culture strategy. The objective is to understand the final version of the strategy, how it will be implemented, and how success will be measured. And to do that, I welcome Richard Gibson, who is the Head of Communities, Wellbeing and Partnerships, Ali Moore, who is the Chairman of the Culture Board, and Andrew Lansley, the Culture Board Coordinator. So over to you, Richard.
Right, hopefully that's working. Thank you, Chair, for that introduction. So hopefully you've seen the report. It describes the progress that we've undertaken over the last kind of couple of years to develop both an independent culture board for Cheltenham and the work it's done to develop its strategy. I think it's important to note that the board is independent of the Borough Council. This is not direct service delivery. And as such, really pleased to welcome Ali Moore here, who's chair of the Culture Board, and Andrew Lansley, who's the Culture Board Coordinator. So if you have any difficult questions, these two guys will be dealing with them. But we really welcome the opportunity to brief members about our work. We're really excited by the work we've been involved with, the development of the board and the strategy. It's not perfect, it's still a bit messy, but I think we've got, for the first time, a real sense of direction of travel with cultural organisations in the town coming behind the strategy and the board. But I'll pass on to Ali, who will say a few words.
Okay. Good evening, everyone. Yes, to pick up where Richard left off, this feels like the first time, I think, certainly in living memory, that the town has collaborated in terms of people coming together to think about, well, a number of things. How does the cultural organisations and the wider infrastructure work together to achieve specific aims? What are those aims? What are we trying to achieve? So the first thing is, what do we actually want for Cheltenham? And actually what came out loud and clear was the idea of everyone thriving. Because actually, as you know, lots of people do lots of things, but and some people have more collaboration than others. So actually, what can we do together? So I think the first major thing is just, having people around the table from all different sectors and all different organisations feels a real first. And that growing trust among partners is something quite massive. So, just a number of things that feel particularly important. The first is the networking that has been created. So either if you're an artist, for instance, arriving in Cheltenham, knowing that there's now there's a network of artists that there wasn't previously, that now have their own independent life, as it were. But also if you're an organisation coming to the town who wants to invest in the town, so IBM, say, or Deloitte coming to invest in the Golden Valley, if they want to invest in social impact and culture, rather than speaking to individual people now, they can come and speak to the Culture Board and go, this is the budget we've got, this is what we're trying to achieve, so rather than just speaking to one or two people or having repeated conversations. The other thing is that it is linked to that, it's a convening point. So when the Golden Valley team came, they came and presented. When MX, the new MX building, if there are certain slots that we're able to give, we're lobbying currently that certain slots are given free to certain groups within the town. Well, it seems to make sense that if that comes to the Culture Board decide together how to make it fair, so that actually which organisations, which people are going to get free slots to host whatever they want to, rather than it being a bit of a free-for-all, whoever shouts loudest. So there seems to be, a real commitment. It also means that we can develop more projects together. So, for instance, with the Holst anniversary next year, we've now got a number of organisations working together to create a suite of concerts and activities that we can then go for joint funding for instance, and can actually be marketed together as one, rather than different organisations doing something that, it's more luck than judgment as to whether things overlap or opportunities are taken. So that opportunity for joint funding is also, something that now we can build upon. And then also the communication, something that came out massively in the consultation for this, is the fact that people feel that the marketing of Cheltenham is the festivals get quite a lot of marketing, the trust gets quite a lot of marketing, but what about the smaller grassroots elements? So actually we feel that through doing something centrally, working direct with Marketing Cheltenham, where's a one-stop shop for what's going on in Cheltenham? And how does everybody get a voice in what's put together? So again, something like the Culture Board enables us to work with Helen Mole at Marketing Cheltenham to look at, okay, how do we get a one-stop shop? For instance, at the moment it's Visit Cheltenham, but what about the people who live in Cheltenham? Currently everything's on Visit Cheltenham. Do we educate people that it's all there, or do we change the brand and do something that's focused on people who live in Cheltenham, for instance? But those conversations are now happening, which didn't happen before. But probably more than anything, it's about relationships that didn't exist previously. And now there are subgroups for artists. All the festivals now talk to each other. We've got a subgroup of the Paint Festival, the Poetry Festival, the Comedy Festival, obviously the Cheltenham festivals, all of us, Witchwood, now we meet together between each Culture Board, and as does the music sector, the heritage sector, performing arts sector. So people are joined up where they weren't before. So there is a way to go, and what we need to remember within all this is that challenge, as you probably all know, funding for the arts is challenging. Every organisation is struggling big time. So anything that is happening here is over and above what people are doing in their paid job. And a lot of people like Cheltenham Open Studios, Nikki Whitfield does an awful lot for free. So what we've got to remember when we then put together an action plan is this is based on people's goodwill, people's trust of each other, people's willingness to work together, and then in the hope that also, and thanks to the council for providing money for Andrew's role, that then getting funding for it. So, yeah, this is I think, brave, courageous steps, I would say, just spearheaded by an actual desire for the good of the town and the people of the town to get a fair shot and greater access. So, yeah, it's a privilege to be part of it, and yeah, that's all I wanted to say.
Thank you for that. Members, Councillor Took.
First of all, thank you. I enjoyed it, hearing about it, reading your paper, and I actually absolutely love the arts, so I'm really grateful that it's happening. I've got two questions, though, really about the problem, why you were set up, and the problem that you're trying to solve as such, if that makes sense. So, you could come to Cheltenham and you could say, look, we've got lots of world-class festivals, I mean really good festivals, poetry festival, music festival, literary festival, and so on. We've got a good theatre. Many towns would love to have what we have. So, as an outsider, you might say, what's the problem? The second thing is, if you are trying to solve a problem, it seems to me there are two ways to it. One is, trying to bring more excellence to the town so the spectators of the arts, like myself, can enjoy them. Or number two, which is really completely different, is about getting participation in culture and art, which isn't necessarily about excellence, actually. It's about empowering people and well-being and all the things that people get through cultural participation. So my question is, what was wrong that meant it needed to be set up? Is it more about participation, or is it more about bringing more fantastic stuff here? Or is it both? Sorry.
It's both. The problem is that funding for the arts we need more. So one of the problems is money. So how do we get more money to do it more? Second problem is if you look at the stats of all our visitor numbers and you look at the postcodes of where they all come from, that there is a large section of Cheltenham that doesn't access. So we want to work together to make sure that they do. And secondly, there's grassroots talent in Cheltenham that isn't currently being tapped, and the support isn't there as much as it could be and should be. So that's the third. And fourth is that we believe that by working individually as organisations, we're missing opportunities of working together. Now, because organisations and smaller grassroots organisations struggle to stay alive themselves, the argument's always been it's very difficult. I'm struggling to survive myself, let alone work with other people. So actually, what we're doing is pushing beyond that and through that and go the greater good, and the greater win, if we do, is bigger than that desire to actually protect oneself. So I hope that answers your question.
Are there any? Dr. Willingham.
Thanks. I was just looking through, and in my role as Chair of Licensing, I'm really, really glad to see that live music is there. One of the things that concerns me, and I think a lot of premises, is as a town that's got a major conservation area, which is a planning matter, there are a lot of people with very thin, very old walls, very noise-sensitive premises. There are a lot of nighttime venues that want to have their live music, and there are quite a lot of restrictions on changes to make that compatible. How do you see us working together to, because I want live music to come to the town, how do you see us working together to sort of try and square that circle so that we can all get live music that's across the spectrum without getting the objections that we get to the venues that want to deliver that? There we go.
Thank you, David. And that's an important question that is really challenging the music industry around the UK at the moment. Anyone after this, if you look at the Night and Day Cafe situation that's going on with Manchester City Council at the moment, I think you'll see a really good example of exactly what it is you're talking about. And it is that challenge of balancing the benefits to our community and to our young people of a nice broad provision of music and of creative opportunities, at the same time working within an environment to keep people safe, secure, protected by the frameworks that exist to do that. To respond to that directly, I think it's about sharing the specialisms that exist within the culture board that only exist because this cohesion has started taking place. So an example of that is the Bottle of Sauce have just reopened a new music venue which has been upgraded and made bigger as part of a sustainable venue project as well. And part of that was working with the Music Venue Trust, which is a national organisation that works both as a public body and as not just as a public body to represent music venues to local authorities. So we'd worked with them to understand the challenges of opening a new venue within that kind of environment, exactly as you describe. So I think in response, it's getting involved with the culture board. We don't just exist as either a community asset or as a large body representing the greater interests of the town, but we act as glue in between, and I think it's providing that kind of cohesion that will help us deal with exactly that kind of challenge.
Brilliant, thank you. Just to say, at some point in the future and regarding the evening and nighttime economy, please come and talk to the full licensing committee if that would be useful to you, because there will be members there who may have some input, and I think it would be certainly something that we should champion for our town, and it's quite an important part of that. So thank you.
Councillor Williams.
As somebody who probably lives in one of the areas that you said don't really engage, say we've got lots of big shops around us, which that's where we go. A lot of us don't come into town, and I haven't got a school-aged child anymore, so again, these things just sort of kind of pass us by. But I would like to thank Stagecoach for telling me that the Science Festival was on between the 6th and the 11th of June. I passed that today. It was on the side of the back of the bus, so a bit out of date, I think. But so it is difficult because we don't get regular press anymore. We have press every day, get the Echo every day, and you've got all the information there, but up to date. But we just don't get that anymore. It's just not there. And as I said, the supermarkets around us don't say anything. It's just we're in a different area.
So, thank you. Am I to take from that actually there's work for the Culture Board to do in terms of getting the word out about what's happening to different areas, Springbank and others? Yeah, thank you.
Councillor Harvey.
Chair, thank you. And I certainly welcome the Culture Board and the report that we have here. I also ought to point out, Chair, that I didn't declare an interest at the beginning, that I have a non-pecuniary interest as a trustee and board member of the Cheltenham Trust. But I'm asking my questions now on the basis of being the vice chairman of this committee. There seems to be, and this isn't a criticism, it's an observation, and they are two really hard nuts to crack. And I've got confidence in you really trying to sort this out. There seems to be vacancies in the youth positions, and we are desperate in this town to listen to our young people. I have two daughters who are forever bending my ears and have been for a long time, but they're both disabled, so they can't get involved in that respect. So I noticed that some of the positions on some of the lower strategic groups have got youth position vacant. I know you're going to be working to try and fill those positions, so I'm not going to ask you to you know, what you're going to do and how you hope to do that. It's interesting, Ali, you said about Cheltenham and the cooperation. Back in the 90s, the festivals were very much involved with Cheltenham Borough Council, and I was a board member of the Cheltenham Festivals in the 1990s as the chairman of the Leisure Committee. So, but one common theme that you've already picked up on was money for the arts is just not there. And it wasn't a while ago. It seems to be a perennial problem. It's always going to be not there. I'm very keen on one of the comments here in that the community stated strongly that there needs to be more diverse expressions of culture and greater support for ethnically diverse communities locally. So I'm absolutely delighted that Florence and CARE and Lives of Colour is involved in the board. But the community that Florence is a part of, a very, very strong part of, is 1% of the population of Cheltenham. There was another community, the Asian community, which makes up 4% of the population of Cheltenham. This is what happens when the census records are published, sorry. So I'd be very interested to know, going forward, how the board tries to engage with the culturally and ethnically group of diverse people that is our Asian community, because they're not involved in any of the subgroups either, I don't, unless you're going to correct me, Andrew.
Thank you, Councillor Harvey. I've been waiting for someone else to bring up that stat in a meeting. Yes, from our last census, we could tell that we doubled the Southeast Asian community within Cheltenham. So actually, Florence and CARE have been fantastic. And again, where the Culture Board has served very well, is they've now connected us via David Evans to Chung Kong, who's helping us to develop part of our cultural strategy in step with the community to see what the provision is, what the offer is, and how we can improve engagement. So, on it already, sir.
Also, just to your point on youth, because I think it is important that people actually, that is responded to, is that you're right, that a big part of the strategy is about building the youth engagement in the town. What we're waiting on at this moment is that the Trust have a board of young creatives that they refer to. We're just creating our youth programming board and 2 young members on our board. So what we're aware of is that different organisations have different youth, a lot of which know each other and are sometimes the same person. So what we want to make sure is that actually that structure of how it feeds into the culture board is actually that those are all joined up, rather than going out with another recruitment, which you'll probably get exactly the same people who are here, here and here, but actually how do these feed into here in a strategic way? So that's why it's not filled at the moment. But the idea is that when we do, that it's actually, it's got brains behind it.
And Chair, if I could also add, there are also discussions, Cheltenham Borough Council and at Cabinet, around how we get better at youth engagement. So I think, if you, as Ali's just set out, there are many strands. There's also Cheltenham Education Partnership and the work that it does as well. So you've got potentially 4 strands. We just need to knit it together. But as Ali said, the involvement and the support for young people through culture is really important. Well, that's why we've made it one of our priorities.
Councillor Chilling.
Actually, some of my questions have already been taken, but I did want to say it's really exciting and it's really good news that getting everybody together like this. And I just wonder, you know, how will you know when you've got to where you want to be? Just something that came up at a residents' meeting I was at before, and you alluded to it, Ali, in terms of the Visit Cheltenham. But you know, how do we get information out to our own residents, particularly since you know they are concerned about not having a tourist information centre and things like that. So you know, getting the messages out and to the right people, as Suzanne has been mentioning.
That bit, I can't answer that last bit yet, because I would say that we're still in that phase of actually working out how best. But I feel like we've understand the problem, and now we're working together to find the solution. So we'll come back to you on that one. The other one, how do you know? I mean, the short answer is it'll never be done, because until every single person in Cheltenham thrives, and whatever that, then it'll never be done, which is overwhelming in some ways, but also motivating in another. So, but I think attendance at Culture Board is paramount. Currently, I think there are about 26 people who sit on the culture board. We have maybe apologies from 3 people. So we have an extraordinary attendance. So when that starts waning, we think something isn't working. I think another key thing is funding. So when we start getting place-based funding, we're actually, we've specifically said that not one organisation will do that. It just depends who in that particular project is leading and then devolve to the others. So as soon as that income stream starts coming, I think that will be a real achievement. And then it's that community voices. You know, when do we start seeing, you know, when do we feel that we've got a free ticket scheme that isn't just at the festivals, but is actually across the town? You know, working with Cheltenham, we work with Cheltenham Refugees and CCP, but what about other organisations and how do we support others and get funding for others to be able to do it? So things like that. But hopefully the KPIs that we set through the action plan will help us measure those and see that progress.
Councillor Babbage, and this will be the last question, if you would.
I will try and keep it as brief as I can, Chair. I don't mean this to sound like a negative question, but so please bear that in mind. But I guess is there a concern with a remit this wide that there isn't as much focus in particular areas, or is perhaps that's what's trying to be addressed with the various committees? Because I guess there's sort of obviously an awful lot of areas on here that are very clearly kind of arts focused from that, but then there are others that aren't quite as directly, you wouldn't necessarily immediately think of, if I put it that way. So I guess how do you strike that balance, I guess, is the question.
Thank you. I presume you're meaning things like the sustainability, the one. I think it's a tricky one. I think but I think because what we do is so broad-ranging, and actually there's nothing on there in terms of, there's the economy as well. We couldn't not have the economy one in terms of we must have a central voice of the arts. What's the value of it, social impact and numerical, to be able to shout loudly about the value of Cheltenham. I think, so the only one that I can think you're meaning is the sustainability one, which to a certain extent you sort of think, well, everything has to link with that. And the arts, not only in terms of our own carbon footprint, but what we're platforming and the voice we're having collectively, it seems to be so important. And I think also the other thing is practice, the fact that it's own, you know, we need to be talking across sectors about this issue. So, and this is the forum to do it, because there isn't really any other where you would have the organisations, large and small, in a room where this can be discussed. Andrew?
And just to come in before Andrew does, I think it's a really good point. It is a broad remit, albeit it is a 3-year strategy. And as you can see within the action plan, what we've tried to do is take it in bite-sized chunks by kind of illustrating what we see as the definites, e.g. the Holst 150th anniversary celebrations next year. That kind of feels that should be a definite, so we're committing to that. But we've also included some aspirations. So we're not committing ourselves, but these are the things that we'd like to do. We've only got Andrew. We've got a very small pot of funding to employ Andrew. He probably does a day and a half a week on the culture board. So we have to be really aware just of the limited resources that we've got. But I don't think any of us would apologise for being ambitious in terms of where we want to go with culture. The hope is we can bid for, now that we've got the strategy and the action plan, that gives us the platform to bid to the Arts Council for funding to get more of Andrew's time, or even clone Andrew and get a couple of Andrews. But that's where, to make a real difference, we do need, because as Ali said, this is voluntary and goodwill, the people who attend the board, so we've got to be really careful of that.
Yes, Councillor Babbage, having such a huge cultural offer in this town does tend to be both a blessing and a curse. So it does look quite amorphous in terms of what we're trying to achieve. For me, what really speaks from the strategy and what the cultural community of this town can offer is in two areas particularly. And I think the strategy, every strategic point, every action plan point addresses either a challenge within our community or a challenge for our economy. And at the moment, if we don't have a KPI for it, the idea is to set or establish a baseline measure for it. So where we are having to invent the wheel, I don't think we should be embarrassed about being a little bit pushy on this one and try and be a bit ambitious with it. But where we are trying to invent that wheel, we are trying to size it at the same time. So, but I don't know what it's going to look like for the moment. So bear with.
No more time. Sorry about that, Julian. There is no doubt in my mind that culture is part of Cheltenham's DNA. And I believe that the establishment of the Culture Board can only enhance its reputation for culture. I appreciate that it's in its formative state at the moment. The scope is ambitious, which it should be. It's easy to cut back rather than expand. So I think that's a brave decision to embrace as many aspects of culture as you can. And I wish you the very best with that. And what I would like to do, I would like to invite you back in a year's time to tell us how you've progressed and hopefully what benefits the Culture Board has brought to Cheltenham. So Ali, Andrew and Richard, thank you very much for your attendance and for the work that you are doing. Thank you. Moving on with the agenda, item 9 is feedback from other scrutiny meetings attended. The Gloucestershire Economic Growth Overview and Scrutiny Committee, Gloucestershire Police and Crime Panel and Gloucestershire Health Scrutiny Committee have not met since the last ONS meeting in June. Item 10, updates from scrutiny task groups. There aren't any task groups at the moment, so there's no updates. And item 11, a review of the scrutiny work plan. And as is usual, if there are any items which members, whether of this committee or members in general, want the committee to consider, if they would forward those to the subcommittee, who will consider them. The date of our next meeting is the 4th of September. Now we move to an exempt session, so I need to read out the notice under item 13. The committee is recommended to approve the following resolution: that in accordance with section 100A, brackets 4, Local Government Act 1972, the public be excluded from the meeting for the remaining agenda items, as it is likely that, in view of the nature of the business to be transacted or the nature of the proceedings, if members of the public are present, there will be disclosed to them exempt information as defined in paragraph 3, part 1, schedule 12A, Local Government Act 1972, namely paragraph 3, information relating to the financial or business affairs of any particular person, including the authority holding that information. Paragraph 5, information in respect of which a claim to legal professional privilege could be maintained in legal proceedings. Members are required to show approval with a show of hands.